Hey Seekers, just a heads up. This episode contains open and honest conversations about death, the dying process, and end-of-life care. We discuss real-life examples of death, including emotional and practical aspects of what happens when someone dies. While these topics are shared with care and compassion, they may be sensitive or triggering for some listeners. Please take care as you listen, and feel free to pause or return when you're ready. Hey fellow Seekers, and welcome back to the Hanged Woman podcast. I'm your host, Julienne Irons, and this is part 2 of our conversation with death midwife and advocate, Kim Stravers. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1, I highly encourage you to go listen to it, because we explored Kim's path into this sacred work, and why planning for our own death can be one of the most loving things we can do for ourselves and for the people we care about. Now, in this episode, just be prepared, because we're going to go even deeper. Kim is going to gently walk us through what actually happens as the body prepares to die. From the physical signs to the spiritual shifts, this part of the conversation is about demystifying the process and offering insight into how we can show up for ourselves and for those we love with clarity, presence, and compassion. So, if you're ready, Seekers, let's get into it. Hey fellow Seekers, I'm taking a quick pause from the show to share something really close to my heart, and honestly, the only reason you're even listening to this podcast right now. It's Three of Cups. My sisters and I created Three of Cups, an Iron Sisters mission of love, as a space for healing, beauty, growth, and community, because we believe life is meant to be full, rich, and abundant in every way. We offer all kinds of ways to support you, like energy healing, heart-centered art, plant-based medicinals, even marketing that will help enhance your brand's presence in the world. Because wherever you are in your journey, we want to help you feel seen, supported, and empowered. So if you're looking for something to help fill your cup in whatever way you need, come join us. Follow us on Instagram at 3 of Cups Healing, or explore all of our offerings at 3ofcupshealing.com. Because Seeker, your cup deserves to be full. And now, back to the episode. Are you able to walk us through the stages of the dying process?
Yeah, I can give you broad strokes for that. They're going to look different depending on what is going on with someone's particular body. So, someone who is experiencing terminal illness is going to have a different experience than somebody who has, say, dementia, which is going to be different from somebody who has, say, heart disease or kidney disease. So, the shape of your trajectory is going to be different based on those circumstances. But generally speaking, you have your period of like maybe more interventions. Oftentimes people opt for a lot of treatment, chemo, resections, immunotherapy, physical therapy, and all of these things that people have available to them from like the medical perspective. They're trying oftentimes they're in the curative stage. So if you get a diagnosis, most often people are trying to figure out, how do I get rid of this disease process that's in my body? So you're looking for treatment, and maybe things are a little bit more aggressive. Again, there's no norm, there's no blanket for everyone, but when you're in the curative stage, you are actively trying to put the cancer in remission, eradicate the disease in some way, as well as managing your symptoms throughout that process. At a certain point, it will become evident that the treatment is not going to be successful. You have hit like the end of the efficacy for something like chemo, where potentially the the side effects and the consequences of those treatments and those surgeries and those other interventions might start to feel like they outweigh the potential benefits. So, what happens with someone who is undergoing a lot of interventions is, when you are in your, say, optimal state of health, and you can think about what it means for you to be 100%, and then you go in and you have a surgery to remove a tumor. When you recover from that surgery and it's early on, you might get right up against 100% in your recovery phase. But the more interventions, the more aggressive the disease is in its progression, the longer the time goes on, plus a million other factors, you are not bouncing back to 100 every single time. It is more likely that you have a new 100, and then a new 100, and a new 100, and those 100s are lower than what your 100 was in a healthy body. So you're bouncing back in the sense that you are recovering from the acute phase of the intervention and returning to what feels more normal for you, but you are still pretty far off the mark from what it used to be 100%. So that combination of factors and that sort of bounce back will start to lead you to a place where the, let's say, like the nausea and the vomiting and the brain fog and the achiness and the neuropathy maybe that might come with chemotherapy at a certain point, you're not going to bounce back very well from that anymore, and you may not be willing to tolerate all of those side effects anymore, because it's becoming clear that that cancer is not abating. It's not going into remission. So maybe it's starting to metastasize into new places. There's a point at which it's diminishing returns, and then it's maybe completely flipped over where it's causing more harm than causing you benefit. This is an individual decision. And there are many people who, either because of their personal nature or because the people around them are telling them that they need to fight as hard as they can up until the very last moment, never elect to go on hospice service, which is fine. Always elect for continuing more aggressive treatment, which is fine. Never sign a DNR, which is fine. This is how we wind up with people who are in their, say, late 80s getting chest compressions and suffering a ton of broken ribs because they don't, in their mind, the best choice for them is to always pursue resuscitative and curative treatment. This is all okay, but it's a matter of thinking about the consequences. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? We learned this in school, physics. From a intervention and disease progression perspective, I think it's useful to think about what is the bounce back effect from these interventions, and at what point are we moving from being in a curative phase to being in a palliative phase. Palliative care means comfort care. Palliative begins, can begin, as soon as you get your diagnosis. So you can be engaged with palliative care throughout your curative stage. And then when you reach the,
What's palliative care? Can you explain what that is?
it's comfort care. So it's symptom management, and it's looking out for your environment, your relationships, your logistics, your planning. Is just trying to optimize your quality of life and your personal comfort. So it's pain management and symptom management on the one hand, but it's also emotional and spiritual reassurance. These kinds of things are part of the equation as well. So that's available all the way through palliative care if you are diagnosed with a life limiting illness. But when you get to the stage where it's clear that treatment is no longer going to have the same effect that you desire, and you wish to stop doing that treatment, then you're at the point at which we are strictly in palliative care. And it is often the stage in which people elect to go on hospice service. Hospice is just the very end of palliative care. So hospice is comfort care, but it's the kind of comfort care where, largely speaking, although there are beginning to be some exceptions I'm hearing to this rule, you have declined curative treatment. So while you will still be treating, let's say, a broken leg, you are likely not going to treat something like pneumonia, because you are accepting that death is near and you want to just be comfortable. You're done fighting all the things that could be taking you out, and you are willing to just go through the process of whatever your body is going to experience, while keeping an eye on your pain, keeping an eye on your alertness, managing those things to the degree to which you desire. For some people, let's say, who have been sober for 40 years, the idea of taking morphine, no, I'm not going to take any kind of an opioid. I'm not going to take any kind of a pain medication. I want to be not introducing those substances into my body now. I've been clean of them for decades, and I'm not willing to do that now. Respect. That's their choice, right? Other people are like, send me to the moon. I don't want to feel anything. So there's all kinds of
That'd be
choices in
me.
between. Yeah. I would love to
Yes.
have my pain managed also. But that's me. That's personal for my choice. So when you get into that sort of stage where you are ceasing curative treatment and you are really just in palliative care, and the body is starting to advance closer to death, Barbara Carnes is an RN who has been doing this work as a hospice nurse for decades, and she has written some incredible booklets that are available through many hospice organizations that I give to the people that I engage with as a doula, to help give them the broad strokes of what is going to happen to you months before death, weeks and days before death, imminent death. The one that is most common is called Gone from My Sight. It's a little pamphlet. It's a great resource. But really, the things that she describes in here and that any RN would tell you and doulas will tell you as well, you are embarking on a process that, first of all, is known to the body. The body is intelligent and it knows how to shut down the shop, just as it knows how to take its first breath, right? So it knows what to do and it will start to shut things down in the order in which it knows. So you're going to become sleepier. You're going to become less engaged with the world around you. So, for example, whereas 6 months ago, your granddaughter's dance recital might have been something that you wanted to see the recording of and you'd be really excited. You want to talk with her on the phone about it. As you're getting closer to dying, you might not be as interested. It's not because you don't love your granddaughter, but you've got bigger fish to fry at this point. Your body is taking all of its available energy and resources to die. So the more that it has to focus on that, the less it has to give to other systems in the body. So things will start to change. You're going to become maybe less able to take care of yourself. So some things might start to go in terms of your ability to get up and say, get out of bed. Your mobility is going to decrease. At a certain point, you will likely, not everyone, but often people become bedbound. So that means that someone has to help them with toileting, with hygiene, with these kinds of things. They're going to be sleeping more. Their pain may increase. Their pain may decrease in some ways. As the body gets closer, the two systems that shut down that we say define death are respiration and your circulation, so your heart and your lungs. So when those cease to function, that is clinically, you have died. Along the way, they're starting to shut down also, right? So you're going to notice some changes in someone's breathing patterns. So not just the number of breaths that they take per minute, but the pattern of their breathing. So where it may have felt very regular and steady, you might start to see some spikes or some panting, and then big periods of apnea, which is no breathing. So the space between breaths might get longer. You might hear what is so unfortunately called the death rattle, which is just a matter of the secretions that are natural in your body. You're losing your ability, your muscle tone, right? Your ability to swallow, like things are getting slack. They are relaxing into death. So your ability to swallow, let's say, is going to be impacted a little bit. So fluids are just starting to collect in places where otherwise you would have been in a healthier body able to clear those secretions. They're not drowning. They are rarely in distress, but it sounds terrifying to the people who surround them. If it becomes just unbelievably bothersome to everyone, there are medications that can dry up the secretions, but then they dry up everything else in the body with a mucous membrane. So dry eyes, dry mouth, dry inside of your nose. What's the trade-off? You're going to experience changes in your blood pressure and changes in your heart rate also. The body is still trying to survive, but things are shutting down. So your blood pressure is going to be maybe dropping and your heart rate is going to be elevated. It's pumping a lot harder because it's trying to keep your blood pressure up, but your blood pressure is dropping because things are shutting down. You might see some changes in the skin. And this is going to look different on every body and every skin tone. It's called modeling, is one way. It looks like marbling a little bit on people. It's usually like palms of the hands, soles of the feet. It can start to travel like up the arms, up the legs. Your circulatory system is shutting down. So the blood's not flowing all the way to your extremities anymore. It's keeping it closer. When someone's hypothermic and they get blue in the fingers because the blood is going to the core of the body, same thing's happening when you're dying. The blood is going to the most vital organs. It's starting to say, we don't really need all this extra stuff out here anymore. You might see some bluing or discoloration, might look gray, might look brown, might look more black, might look more purple, might look more blue, depending on your skin tone in the fingertips, right? That's called cyanosis. And then the modeling is just this kind of, yeah. Have you ever seen like a well marbled piece of steak? That's what it starts to look like, spotting or marbling on the hands and the soles of the feet. All this to say, it doesn't happen to everyone. And it doesn't happen at any defined time, but it might, and it often does. And so these are some of the ways that we start to look at the body for signs of like, how close are we getting? And the reason we want to know that is because for many people, it's important for them that people are there to witness their death. So if we know someone is going to be dying soon, we're calling in the family, we're calling in the community, we're calling in the people who are important to them. Maybe we're calling in some clergy or some religious leaders. Maybe we're calling in a prayer group. Maybe we're calling in threshold choir. Maybe we're calling in the pets to be make sure they're on the bed because it was this person's dying wish to have the cat curled up on their lap as they're dying. We're getting ready for the very end. So we're looking for certain things in the body, but we're also letting go of expectations. And that's a really big theme in doula work and in working with people to prepare for the end. It's like you can plan. There's what is that saying? It's how do you make God laugh? Make a plan. Right. So it's the same kind of thing. It's like you can plan this to the T and then you never know how it's really going to go. People also sometimes experience what we might call the rally. It is when someone is, say, unresponsive for a really long period of time, like a couple of weeks. They're not eating much, right? So, like, also as the body's shutting down, you are defecating and urinating less because you're taking in less food and drink. The decline in appetite and thirst is totally normal. The body doesn't need more energy. And also, as your internal organs are starting to shut down, your digestion is impacted. Maybe you can't take those things in the same way. You can't swallow in the same way. Overhydrating somebody can be dangerous and can cause pain. This is where the nurses come in and they step in with their deep medical knowledge. But paying attention to not trying to force grandma to eat when grandma says she's not hungry is important at this stage. So, all of this to say, we have this absolutely, in some ways, known and in many ways mystical experience unfolding in front of us where we are watching the body do what it knows how to do and just being with it, just witnessing. It is such a remarkable moment. Oh, sorry for the rally. Just to go back to that, when they're in this moment of they say they appear to be just like deeply unconscious, they're not responsive, they're not really eating and drinking. And then they just shoot up out of bed one day. They sit bolt upright and they're like, I really want a cheeseburger. Also, can you call Aunt Sarah? There's something I really want to tell her. It's this, we don't really know why it happens, but it's happened enough times where it's in the literature that this is something that people can often see this like crazy weird surge right at the end. And then when that's over, it's very brief. It doesn't last for a week or something, typically. When that's over, then we are imminent, typically. Then it's like hours, usually before somebody dies. Other things that might happen too, when somebody's getting closer to the end, you might hear them start to talk about people in the room who we can't see, who have already died. So, my step grandmother of many decades, she died recently. When she was in her last stages, one of my aunts was telling me that she was in the room with her, and my grandmother was talking to her first husband, not my grandfather, who died in 2017, but her first husband, who had died many years before that. So Jim was in the room, and she was talking to Jim. Someone's getting close. So they're having conversations with people who have preceded them in death. They also sometimes talk about packing for a trip or they got to go somewhere. Right? So there are these like inexplicable elements that surround the dying process that have really like nothing to do observably with the body that we can be like, oh, this is a scientific biological process and this is what's going down. Sometimes it's just in the realm of the esoteric. My mom was dying. One of the things that I tried to do with her often was ask her if she had been dreaming. And there was a morning where she said, yeah, I had a dream about Pop Up. That was her dad. He died in the early 90s. I had a dream about Pop Up and he was handing me a cardinal. It was a really pleasant dream for her. She was very close to her dad, and the cardinal was her symbol for my brother. It still chokes me up every time I tell that story. But that was what she was dreaming about. And she was gone within, I would say, a week of having had that dream. So, on some metaphysical level, she was 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I like to think of it. She was communicating and preparing for her transition on a level that like isn't even accessible or observable to any of us. And there's something for me in my own personal practice, my own personal views around death that's so compelling and beautiful about that. It's not everybody's experience, and there are people who die in terrible painful ways. But there are also moments where we find these joyful, funny, memorable moments that can make us feel like there's something bigger at play.
How have you seen cultural or generational differences shape the way people approach death?
The influence of our culture and our time in which we are existing on this planet, like our generation, matters so much. So I think as we get more, I think about like things like social media. And so the interconnectivity and the instant availability of people, any place on the planet to you at any time, any piece of information that we've ever known pretty much feels like you can find it on the internet somewhere. I think in some ways, people now are more informed about and taking more agency around their choices that have to do with death and dying than they did years ago. I think we're moving toward more death transparency. You'll see this hashtag on social media, or maybe you mentioned in the culture about like death positivity, be death positive. I don't love that also because it's a value statement for me, but I love death neutrality and I love death acceptance and I love death curiosity and I love death transparency. I love all these other words that we can maybe substitute in for like positivity. I think we're moving toward a space of better comprehension, a little bit less fear in some ways, because we can start to see the inner workings a little bit more. It's like you can see videos of any kind of funeral service. People post selfies next to the casket now. People didn't necessarily do that 100 years ago. So, in some ways, the information about death and dying that is available to us is much more accessible than it has ever been. And so, maybe that is allaying some people's trepidations and fears around death and dying and empowering them to become more prepared to make these choices for themselves sooner. But on the other hand, we are very far removed in a lot of ways from the intimacy of death that used to be part of our experience 100 years ago. A funeral parlor is called a parlor because the parlor was the room in the home where you laid out the body when someone died. 100 years ago and beyond, people died at home, and it was largely the women who did the body care and the tending of the dead. Men in the family typically would be the ones digging the plot, lowering the casket. So there was that separation of responsibilities. However, people cared for their dying and their dead at home, and it was a community event. So people grew up in a culture where death was literally right in front of them. As a child, you weren't rushed out of the room. If someone's dying in the house, you're there for it. And then the body's in the house and you're there for it. And then you're going to the funeral and you're there for it. And so, in some ways, maybe it's more normalized back then. And we know a little bit more about what to expect because we've seen it. We've seen what happens when somebody's body begins to break down. And we see what happens to people around us as they're grieving and what's important to them. Maybe we have different things we grieve now, actually, than we did 100 years ago because we are removed from it in such a way that it has been pushed into this external industrialized version of death care where now you have to be licensed and it has to be a business and there's permitting and there are regulations and there are rules and it is profitable. That's very different. So it has moved in some ways to becoming more accessible, I think, in the sense of information and working within the systems that are present now. But an opposite effect, I think people are less intimately connected to death and dying because they are not given the opportunity to be with it in the ways that we were when we were taking care of our dead at home. However, in the last few years, there has been a big resurgence in desire for and information to share with people around their rights to take care of their dead. People are allowed to die at home. You are allowed to have your loved one's body at home for usually about a couple of days after, maybe 3 max. I wouldn't push it beyond that. And every state's, of course, different. You can have a home funeral. If it is zoned for this, you can bury somebody on your property. In no state in the United States is it mandatory that you use an outer burial container and someone has to be in a fancy casket to be buried. But because they're private businesses, they get to set their rules. So if for them, it is their practice of having this cement vault or outer burial container in the plot, and then the casket gets lowered into, that's your choice if you want to go with that cemetery. But that's not from a federal statutes standpoint. That's not mandated. Nobody has to have that. but people don't know because we don't talk about it. And then we show up at the funeral home in acute grief without our logical brain very accessible to us. And we're looking to people for answers because we didn't do the pre work of sitting with death beforehand, before it became urgent. I worked as a funeral attendant for a couple of years, and I had the opportunity to witness so many different types of funeral services: Buddhist, Hindu, Latter day Saints, general Christian, Catholic services, Mexican Catholic services here in the Southwest, right? Mariachi at the graveside. We hosted a Tongan service. So folks showing up in ceremonial dress and performing at graveside. For the Buddhist services, monks, 7 hours. There's food laid out, there's a table, there's seating, there are candles, there's incense going, witness cremations, accompanying the body to the retort and being part of the process to ease someone into their final transition. Orthodox Jewish burials, Muslim burials, the head has to face a particular direction. In an Orthodox Jewish burial, there's a hand washing station. So there are different, it's a rite of passage in a different way for different faith traditions and different cultures. It is fascinating to me to be able to be exposed to them and to learn about them. And I think really, no matter what systems we have in place that direct or influence how we care for our dying and how we celebrate our dead, I think people always find a way to hold true to the traditions that are most meaningful to them in their culture, in their family, in their community. You find a way. You find a way.
The next question of any shifts that you've noticed, or have there been any shifts that you've noticed in how communities are either reclaiming or resisting traditional death care practices? What are you seeing from your position in the work that you do?
I think that there is, as I said, a move in some circles to refamiliarize themselves with ancestral death care practices. So discovering through the roots of your heritage, the heritage of your community, your culture, where you're living, as much as like where you come from. So going back to like ancestral traditions is something I see people doing. Part of my heritage is Irish. So for me, investigating those traditions is learning things like you always open a window so that someone's soul can leave the home. So like discovering things like that and then trying to find ways to then fit that into the systems that are available to us is part of it. So I think people are getting more curious about what people have always done who are in their line and however way that line is drawn. I think people are becoming more interested in the idea of what it could mean to have a home funeral. The National Home Funeral Alliance, National Home NHFA, yes, incredible resource for anybody who wants to know the basics about how to care for someone who has died in your home, how to prepare them for a service. I think more people are getting interested. I don't know that we're going to see this incredible wave. It's going to shift back toward people really doing this at home more so than people dying in hospitals and assisted living facilities or under hospice service and then doing the service at a funeral home, a mortuary, a synagogue, wherever else folks might be wanting to have their services. But I do think it's interesting that folks are trying to figure out what that means. How do you keep a body cool? How do you safely transport someone? What kind of permits do you have to get? What are the zoning regulations? This kind of a thing. And I think also people are getting more interested in more eco-friendly or alternative methods of disposition. So I'd mentioned earlier alkaline hydrolysis or aquamation. Again, every method of disposition is going to have a consequence. There is an impact. There is no impact free. Even if you put a body into the ground, it has an effect, right? It has an effect by its decomposition. Choosing things that feel more environmentally sustainable is becoming more and more important to certain people. Maybe they don't want to be put into a cement vault in a $15,000 casket that's lacquered and has a bunch of non biodegradable materials in it. Maybe that doesn't feel right for them. Maybe they'd rather move towards, say, a wicker casket that can go into. Maybe it still has to go into the vault, but at least they're taking one piece out that feels less sustainable to them. Maybe they're moving toward natural organic reduction. This is only legal in a handful of states, although those states will work with you. Funeral homes will work with you for transportation permits to move the body to their facilities for processing. But in those places, you're not having the release of toxicity through flame cremation. I think people are getting motivated to learn more about the consequences of these disposition options and then choosing the one that feels most comfortable for them and for their families. And then I think also just the idea of the doula is gaining a lot more traction. Again, this is something that people have been doing for one another since the dawn of time. It is my hope that people become more educated about what it means to be with someone who's dying, not so that they can go out and hang a shingle and run a business and make a buck off of it, although that's acceptable too. I also have a private practice as well as volunteer, as well as companion people who are close to me. But I would love for people to feel more comfortable when someone is dying in their home, that they feel confident that they can show up with this spirit and this education and this knowledge that doulas carry in a really developed way to bedside. I'd love like a trend I would love to see. This is not a question you asked, but a trend that I would like to see would be people embracing their relationship with death as it appears in their lives by just sitting through the struggle of resistance. When you know that someone has been diagnosed with a terminal illness and they are in decline, resisting your resistance to going to visit them because you're afraid of what the body's going to look like or sound or smell or how that person might be or not be behaving or responding. People often wait until the very last minute and then they miss the opportunity to have a cogent conversation with someone because we're so afraid of death. We don't even want to look at somebody who's not even dead yet, but is going to be soon. So that's a way to do it. If you feel so moved, maybe doing some volunteering with your local hospice organization, be of service, be around people who are dying who aren't related to you. That's another way to maybe get a little bit more comfort and familiarity. Just be around folks who are aging and dying. And then I think just starting to think about what that might mean for you and then observing the transitions that are already occurring around you on a daily basis. So treating death more like, if not a friend, an expected visitor, rather than this event to run from or this like nefarious villain who's out to get you. I would love to see people be more welcoming or at least open to the idea that this is going to happen. So why not befriend it if you can?
The depth that you have and your ability to share your work is outstanding. Like, it's really beautiful. And you've changed me today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my passion and to have influenced the way that you think about this. I have a colleague who likes to say, if one person shows up, it's enough. And we forget that sometimes when we're doing a talk or being on a podcast or leading a class or trying to put on a community workshop. We think it's a failure if one person shows. Like we have to have masses of people show up in order for it to be like successful or worth it. But when it comes to death and dying, one conversation, if that shifts someone's thinking 1 degree, who knows where that ripple effect goes? And that's enough. So every time I get to talk about this, it's enough. I'm satisfied with the way that I'm showing up in the world around this work. I think one thing I would like to emphasize that I didn't mention earlier when we were talking about the difference between what doulas offer and what hospice offers. Doulas work with all kinds of death, not only hospice. So, hospice workers are working with people who have a life expectancy of 6 months or fewer if the disease progresses at the established rate. That's like the PAT medical Medicare eligibility definition. Doulas can work with you from the time you have agency over your own body. So, let's say you're decisional and 18 years old, we can help you walk through the beginnings, the bare bones of what it looks like to be prepared for your own death. We can walk with you as you are accompanying somebody else in their death. I have had many clients who have been partners or children of the dying person, not the dying person. They don't want the doula, but the person who's with them does. So doulas are available to the people who are not dying in that moment. We are available to people who experience sudden death. So if you experience a loss that is tragic, violent, unexpected, whether it's a heart attack, it's war, it's a murder, it's death by suicide, sudden illness, we can be there to walk with you and your circle to help look at what is ahead and what that means for you. We can be with people at any stage of life to think about their death. Hospice is limited in its time period, and it has to have some things associated with it, but doulas can work anywhere that death shows up, which is everywhere, including helping people to address their fear and anxiety. I think it's important for people to know that we say end of life doula or we say death doula, but it really is not limited to just when the clock is ticking and you're in the final stretch of the road. It really is at any time.
Thank you so much for your wisdom and your words. And I really do believe that you're going to help a lot of people get past whatever fear they might have when it comes to dying and death.
I'm so glad to have been able to be in conversation with you. It feels so easy and natural for me to talk about death and dying and to be able to be in a conversation that also felt free and easy and full of curiosity. Just really, it just juices me up so much. It brings me so much joy and so much fulfillment to awaken people to different ways of thinking about death and dying that are not the ways that we're told necessarily that we should be perceiving it.
If people want more perspective shifting from you, where can they find you?
I would love to point people to my website, which is nightrosedeathcare.com. I'm available for consultation, for services. I'm also a celebrant, so I do help people with planning services after a loved one has died. Those things are separate, but also available. There are lots of resources for the partnerships that I participate in, the alliances and the communities that I've built, more about my own background, my trainings, my proficiencies, all of those things. So if you're curious to know more about me or to know more about the kind of services that I provide, that's a great place to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You are a gift.
Thank you so much.
Whew. Talk about a perspective shift, huh? So, as we close out this practical lens on death, I want to leave you with this. If we can be present at death the way we are at birth, with softness, awe, and maybe even celebration, how might that shift the way we live? Next week, we're going to sit down with Joelle Maldonado, also known as the Grave Woman. She's a mortician, and she's going to walk us through the science, traditions, and historical truths of death care. So if you've ever been curious about embalming, decomposition, or why death has been so sanitized in the modern world, you won't want to miss it. And if you like this episode and want to hear more, don't forget to like, share, and follow. This is the Hanged Woman podcast, where perspective is power. Until next time, hang in there.